41% of Americans believe that human beings definitely or probably coexisted. That's right, coexisted, lived at the same time with dinosaurs.
Other situations, but public schools cannot teach things that have very little basis in science.
It is bold, and I think some would say very dangerous, to say that Darwinism and evolution is a myth.
Deep, profound ignorance. Of course, you get negative reactions from creationists, but who cares about creationists? They don't know anything.
Very dangerous to say that Darwinism and evolution is a myth.
Who cares about creationists? They don't know anything.
We all have beliefs and ideas about what we think is true. These are called our presuppositions. Sometimes our presuppositions are true, and sometimes they are false. When considering evidence, it's very difficult to set aside the presuppositions that we hold and look at evidence with an unbiased and open mind. Truth is sometimes very hard to accept, especially if it's contrary to what we have believed. Much of the evidence that you will see in this video has been ignored by modern-day science, but a close examination of the evidence will reveal some startling conclusions. In 1841, the first use of the term Dinosauria, meaning terrible lizard, was created by the famous British anatomist and paleontologist Sir Richard Owen. Prior to this, dinosaurs were known by other names. Every culture had names for them. For example, the name that you're probably the most familiar with is dragon. Reports of dragons range from personal encounter reports and science papers to legendary stories like Beowulf and the Loch Ness Monster. A well-known old science book, the Historia Animalium, claims that dragons were not extinct in the 1500s, but the animals were said to be extremely rare and relatively small by then. In 1572, a scientist named Ulysses Aldrovandus carefully described a small dragon seen along a farm road in northern Italy. The rare creature was killed by a farmer when he struck it on the head with his walking stick. Aldrovandus obtained the dead body and made measurements and a drawing. He even had the animal mounted for a museum. It had a long neck, a very long tail, and a fat body. The skeletons of a number of ancient reptile-like creatures called Tanystropius have similarities to the basic description that he gave. One dragon story from the ancient land of Sumer in Babylon tells of the hero Gilgamesh. He decided to make a name for himself by traveling to a distant land to cut great cedar trees needed for his city. He reached the forest with 50 volunteers and discovered a huge reptile-like animal which ate trees and reeds. The story simply says that Gilgamesh killed it and cut off its head for a trophy. Thousands of dragon stories and pictures can be found in ancient Chinese books and art. One legend tells about a famous Chinese man named Yu. The story says, after the great worldwide flood, Yu surveyed the land of China and divided it into sections. He built channels to drain the water off to the sea and helped make the land livable again. Many snakes and dragons were driven off from the marshlands when Yu created the new farmlands. Some old Chinese books even tell of a family that kept dragons and raised them to use their blood and body parts for medicines. In 1611, the emperor appointed the post of royal dragon feeder. An Irish writer recorded an encounter with a large beast with iron-like spikes on its tail, which pointed backwards. Its head had the shape of a horse's, and it had thick legs with strong claws. These details match features of dinosaurs like Kentrosaurus and Stegosaurus, which had sharp, pointed spines on their tails, thick legs, strong claws, and horse-like skulls. The respected Greek explorer and historian Herodotus described small flying reptiles in ancient Egypt and Arabia. These animals sound amazingly like the small pterodactyl Rhamphorhynchus. They had the same snake-like body and bat-like wings. Many had been killed near the city of Buto in Arabia. He was shown a canyon with many piles of their backbones and ribs. Herodotus said that these animals could sometimes be found in the spice groves. They were small in size and of various colors. Large numbers would sometimes gather in the frankincense trees. When workers wanted to gather the tree's valuable juices, they would use smelly smoke to drive the flying reptiles away. The well-respected Grecian philosopher Aristotle said that in his time it was common knowledge that creatures like this also existed in Ethiopia. Similar animals, 3 feet long, were also described in India by the geographer Strabo. In Pliny's book, Natural History, written around 70 AD, he says, "Africa produces elephants, but it is India that produces the largest, as well as the dragon." Claudius Aelians, a Greek military writer of the 2nd century who wrote De Naturia Animalium around 220 AD, in his work stated, "The Phrygian history also states that dragons were born which reached 10 paces in length." 10 paces, that's about 30 feet. The city of Nurlik in France was renamed in honor of the killing of a dragon there. This animal was reported to be bigger than an ox and had long, sharp-pointed horns on its head. In 1271 AD, the great explorer Marco Polo recorded in his writings that the Chinese emperor had dragons that pulled his chariot on special occasions. And in his book, The Travels of Marco Polo, Polo records the following about the Chinese province of Kharazan. He states, "Here are seen huge serpents, 10 paces in length and 10 spans in girth of the body. At the forepart near the head, they have 2 short legs, having 3 claws, like those of a tiger, with eyes larger than a 4-penny loaf and very glaring. The jaws are wide enough to swallow a man. The teeth are large and sharp, and their whole appearance is so formidable that neither man nor any kind of animal can approach them without terror. Others are met with of smaller size, being 8, 6, or 5 paces long." An Anglo-Saxon chronicle from AD 793 reported, "This year came dreadful forewarnings over the land of the Northumbrians, terrifying the people most woefully. These were immense sheets of light rushing through the air, and whirlwinds, and fiery dragons flying across the firmament." Alexander the Great reported when he conquered parts of what is now India in 326 BC, his soldiers were scared by great dragons that lived in caves. In 1275 AD, legend says that George of Lydia, a Roman soldier in the guard of the Emperor Diocletian, killed a dragon while in Libya on a crusade. According to legend, in the 7th century, a dragon named Garguet rose from the waters of the Seine River in France. Unlike the typical dragons of mythology, this one did not breathe fire, but rather was a water dragon. The monster proceeded to lay waste to the countryside around Paris. Saint Romain, the Archbishop of Rouen, accompanied only by a condemned prisoner, set out to stop the beast. They captured the dragon and led it back to Paris, where it was slain and burned. The head, however, was saved and mounted on a building. In commemoration of this event, architects began to design gutter spouts in the shape of the Garguet, and eventually in the shape of all manner of bizarre creatures, now called gargoyles. These stone carvings, which are known as the Ikastones, are an enigma. There have been over 16,000 of these remarkable stones found over the past 75 years. They contain images of daily life, battle scenes, agricultural practices, medical procedures, advanced technologies, and most amazingly, dinosaurs. Nearly every major dinosaur has been identified on these stones. Many skeptics have tried to debunk the Ikastones by saying that they are a modern-day creation, but the evidence indicates differently. In 1535, Spanish conquistadors came through Peru in the area where the Nazca Indians had lived. They reported finding stones with strange animals carved on them. These designs and patterns on the stones also indicate that they are authentic from the Nazca culture. And of the 16,000, only 500 have carvings of dinosaurs on them. Consequently, many of the carvings have nothing to do with the dinosaurs whatever. They were simply observations from everyday life of the Nazca culture. In Acambaro, Mexico, since the 1960s, over 56,000 ancient clay figurines have been discovered. Many of these clay artifacts are sculptures of dinosaurs. The approximate age of these clay figurines is around 4,500 years old. Many people have studied these figurines, and the opinion of their authenticity is divided. Most who have no preconceived biases believe that they are genuine, but others, who believe that the dinosaurs died off millions of years ago, state that they remain skeptical in spite of the radiocarbon dating and investigative evidence that points to their authenticity. 16th century Aztecs produced this dragon sculpture. The face resembles a dinosaur like the Tyrannosaurus. Several other South American and Central American civilizations have produced similar sculptures. These side-by-side comparisons are very revealing. These Central Andes artifacts bear a striking resemblance to dinosaurs like Tyrannosaurus rex and Ceratosaurus. And these Mexican figurines, created sometime between 300 BC and 300 AD, could be replicas of the dinosaur Ankylosaurus. China, an ancient land shrouded in dragon lore and mystery. The Chinese calendar, or zodiac, which was developed as early as 1000 BC, has on it 12 animals, 11 of which are alive today. But is the 12th, the dragon, merely a legend, or is it based on a real animal, the dinosaur? It doesn't seem logical that the ancient Chinese, when constructing their zodiac, would include one mythical animal with 11 common animals. A more rational explanation would be that the dragon, which is mentioned so often in ancient Chinese history, is now extinct or very rare. Here are a few examples of Chinese dragons that look extraordinarily like dinosaurs. Could this be some type of sauropod like the Brachiosaurus? This Chinese pottery artifact looks very similar to a hadrosaur. And this 3rd century BC ornamental box appears to have sauropod dinosaurs built onto it as handles. This 2,500-year-old Chinese dragon closely resembles a creature like a diplodocus. Central Asia, with its dense rainforests and jungles, is home to many stories about strange dinosaur-like monsters, and the artifacts that have been found are quite revealing. The similarities these monsters and dragons have with dinosaurs is undeniable, and coupled with the modern and ancient stories of monsters that continue to be seen in the jungles, leads many to believe that one day one of these rare creatures could be captured or killed. This 12th century Cambodian temple, constructed in 1186, is home to a very interesting dinosaur artifact. The temple is covered with ornate designs and stone carvings on its exterior. This carving of a Stegosaurus-like dinosaur was found on the temple wall. As late as the 1800s, the Dayak culture of Borneo was producing artwork with dinosaurs on them. This water fountain on a Hindu temple built in the 1800s looks very similar to a Triceratops. There have been several other findings like this throughout Central Asia, including these two 10th century bronze sculptures from Nepal, which bear a close resemblance to several types of ceratopsid dinosaurs. European history is filled with dragon artwork, sculptures, and artifacts. These not only include the popular look of dragons seen in much of the artwork, but also include many other fascinating creatures that look very similar to dinosaurs. The Palestrina mosaic from around 100 AD has several animals depicted that appear to be extinct or prehistoric. Why would Roman culture place prehistoric, extinct creatures within their historical documents and artwork? The obvious answer is that they existed together and they recorded what they observed. Here we see a dinohyus, which means terrible pig. The dinohyus was supposed to have died off about 24 million years ago. And here we see several men fighting what appears to be a type of quadruped dinosaur. Found at Carlisle Cathedral on the tomb of Bishop Richard Bell, who died in 1496, are these two brass engravings. Here are two dinosaurs depicted on a 2nd century Roman inscription. The Thracians were a group of Indo-European tribes who spoke the Thracian language and thrived from 3200 BC to 500 BC. This Thracian helmet is adorned with an ornament that looks much like the Centosaurus. Look at the ornament in comparison to skeletal remains and drawings. Many other ancient cultures throughout history have given us artwork, sculptures, and artifacts that point to the existence of dinosaurs and man together. Take a look at a few more of these amazing artifacts. This amazing cave drawing was found in Wapatki National Park, Arizona. It's thought to be around 1,000 years old. At Bridges National Monument in Utah, the Anasazi Indians made this cave drawing several thousand years ago. This 5,300-year-old ancient cylinder seal was found in Mesopotamia. In a book by A.M. Myler, written from 1725 to 1727, recounting his travels from Rome to Jerusalem, then to Troy, Egypt, Syria, and Malta, are found pictures of many things that Myler saw and drew as he traveled. This is a drawing of something seen by Myler. It appears to be some sort of flying dragon. Much more likely, it was a breed of pterosaur. Indians in the American Southwest and also throughout Central and South America tell stories of the thunderbird that by description and some archaeological evidence could be a pterosaur or a pterodactyl, and Indian prayer sticks that are used to this day. In 1925, this creature washed up on the coast of California. E.L. Wallace, president of the Natural History Society of British Columbia, said, "My examination of the monster was quite thorough. It had no teeth. Its head is large, and its neck a full 20 feet long. I would call it a type of plesiosaurus." Another witness, Judge W.R. Springer of Santa Cruz, felt that the creature was from a prehistoric age. He added his observation, evidence of 2 short feet or flippers, and probably swam with its head high above the water. During the 1930s and 40s, such creatures were spotted many times by fishermen of Monterey's sardine fleet, with one account stating that it was witnessed by one boat's entire crew of 12 men. There have been thousands of other confirmed sightings of very large, long-necked serpent-like creatures from the United States, Canada, Scotland, Russia, Norway, English Channel, Brazil, China, Japan, and Sweden. Several unidentified dead creatures of similar description have also been found. Skeptics make excuses for such sightings, but the evidence still remains. The sheer number and also the valid testimonies of people of reputable character make these sightings hard to deny. One account from 1923 from Frank H. Melliland, an explorer and author, states that he collected reports from natives of an aggressive flying reptile they called Kongamato. He said that the natives were occasionally tormented by these creatures and described them as being featherless with smooth skin, having a beak full of teeth and a wingspan of between 4 and 7 feet. When shown illustrations of pterosaurs, Melliland reported, quote, "Every native present immediately and unhesitatingly picked out and identified it as the Kongamato." Another account was given by a Montana resident, Dwayne Hodgkinson. Mr. Hodgkinson was in the Army in 1944 and was stationed in New Guinea. While out on a trek to one of the local villages, a friend, a local guide, and Mr. Hodgkinson observed a very large pterodactyl take off from the ground and fly through the air. Mr. Hodgkinson states that he knows what he saw was a pterosaur, and this is a composite sketch of what he says he saw. His eyewitness story can be watched online at youtube.com. In 1971, Australian psychologist Brian Hennessy was in Papua New Guinea. He states that he and the man that he was with saw a large flying creature that, in his words, looked prehistoric. He described the creature as having no feathers, black to dark brown in color, with a wingspan of at least 6 feet. He states that it also had a very long tail. The San Antonio Light, a newspaper of Texas State, reported on February 26, 1976, that 3 local school teachers were driving to work on an isolated road to the south of the city on February 24th when they saw an enormous bird sweeping low over the cars on the road. They reported that the bird had a wingspan of 15 to 20 feet and leathery wings. After the incident, the teachers all identified the creature they saw as a pterodactyl. As described previously, the historical record is filled with stories of men hunting dragons, fiery serpents, and other large reptile-like creatures. With this background in mind, let's look at the over 35 references that the Bible gives of dinosaurs. The Bible describes 6 different creatures that fit the description of what we call a dinosaur. They are dragon, flying serpent, fiery serpent, leviathan, cockatrice, and behemoth. Don't forget, the word dinosaur wasn't created until 1841, and prior to this, these were the words that were used to describe these ferocious animals. The references, as you will see, give the clear impression that these were mostly mighty and fierce reptile creatures that inhabited desolate places and could wreak havoc and destruction upon anyone who came into contact with them. The word dragon is found 21 times in the King James Bible. Here are several references. Psalm 44:19 says, "Thou hast sore broken us in the place of dragons, and covered us with the shadow of death." Jeremiah 9:11 says, "And I will make Jerusalem heaps, and a den of dragons, and I will make the cities of Judah desolate, without an inhabitant." Jeremiah 14:6 says, "They snuffed up the wind like dragons." Jeremiah 49:33, "And Hazor shall be a dwelling for dragons, and a desolation forever. There shall no man abide there, nor any son of man dwell in it." Jeremiah 51:34, "Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, hath devoured me. He hath crushed me. He hath made me an empty vessel. He hath swallowed me up like the dragon." Micah 1:8, "I will make a wailing like the dragons." There are 2 references to the flying serpents. Isaiah 14:29 says, "For out of the serpent's root shall come forth the cockatrice, and his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent." Isaiah 36 says, "The burden of beasts of the south, into the land of trouble and anguish, from whence come the young and old lion, the viper, and the fiery flying serpent." Notice here, it distinguishes between the viper, which is a venomous snake, and the fiery serpent, which is some sort of fiery reptile that had the capability of flight. 5 times is the fiery serpent mentioned in the scriptures. Numbers 21:6 says, "And the Lord sent fiery serpents among them, and they bit the people, and much people of Israel died." Deuteronomy 8:15, "Who led thee through that great and terrible wilderness, wherein were fiery serpents, and scorpions, and drought, where there was no water." Leviathan is mentioned 4 times in the Bible. It seems to be a very large and fierce creature, which was possibly water-dwelling. Job 41 says, "Canst thou draw out Leviathan with an hook, or his tongue with a cord which thou lettest down? None is so fierce that dare stir him up. Who can open the doors of his face? His teeth are terrible round about. His scales are his pride. Out of his mouth go burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. Out of his nostrils goeth smoke, as out of a seething pot or cauldron. Upon the earth there is not his like." The King James Version of the Bible mentions the cockatrice 5 times. Early English Bibles used the word cockatrice when they translated from Hebrew. The Hebrew word for cockatrice actually meant viper or horned serpent. As with any of these rare reptile creatures, much mythology and lore developed around them over time. Here is what the Bible says about the cockatrice. Isaiah 14:29 says, "Rejoice not thou, whole Palestina, because the rod of him that smote thee is broken. For out of the serpent's root shall come forth the cockatrice, and his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent." Jeremiah 8:17 says, "For behold, I will send serpents, cockatrices among you, which will not be charmed, they shall bite you, saith the Lord." The final word that we find in the Bible that gives reference to dinosaurs is behemoth. Behemoth is mentioned only once in the Bible, in the book of Job, which was written about 3,500 years ago. The description that it gives is very detailed, and when compared to known animals, reveals some interesting results. The book of Job is about a good and just man who lost everything, including his family, his health, and all his possessions. Just about the only thing that he had left was his life. In the process of contemplating all that had happened to him and being somewhat troubled about his situation, he questions God about his purposes in dealing with Job. God replies to Job, and in part of his reply, we find this fascinating statement: "Behold now Behemoth, which I made with thee, he eateth grass as an ox." The Hebrew word behemoth means large quadruped. So this is a very large four-legged animal that eats grass like an ox. The passage continues, "Lo now, his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly." This creature is extremely strong, and it has a big belly. Some scholars say that this creature is an elephant or a hippopotamus because of the above descriptions. Let's take a closer look. An elephant has a big belly. A hippopotamus has a big belly. But the class of dinosaurs called sauropods have the biggest bellies of all. The passage continues, "He moveth his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together." Many Bible translations say, "He moveth his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit together." Now compare. Is this like a cedar? What about this? Nope, not even close. No other animal around today has a tail like a cedar tree. This most likely was the creature that God was referring to in his encounter with Job. Now that looks like a cedar. Let's take a look at the rest of the passage. "His bones are as strong as brass. His bones are like bars of iron. He is chief of the ways of God. He that made him can make a sword to approach unto him." This sounds like a very big, very tough creature, which was chief of all God's creatures. So here we're back to this guy. The elephant and the hippo don't even come close to being the chief of God's creatures. "Surely the mountains bring forth him for food, where all the beasts of the field play. He lieth under the shady trees, in the covert of the reed and fens. The shady trees cover him with their shadow. The willows of the brook compass him about." It sounds like he lives in the swamps which are fens. "Behold, he drinketh up a river, and hasteneth not. He trusteth that he can draw up the Jordan in his mouth." So here we have an extremely large animal that eats grass, has a huge tail that looks like a cedar tree, lives in the swamps, and is so big that it can take up massive amounts of water into its mouth. There is no other animal that fits all of the descriptions given here other than a dinosaur like the Diplodocus or Brachiosaurus.